Have you ever done everything right and still lost her? You stayed loyal, you worked long hours, you paid the mortgage, you were there every night, and still she grew distant. Stopped laughing at your jokes, stopped reaching for your hand, stopped looking at you like you mattered. Have you ever looked into the eyes of a woman who once adored you and realized she doesn't see me anymore? No affair, no yelling, no betrayal, just quiet, a silence that says, I've already left. Just not physically yet. I know that silence. I lived in it for months before she finally said the words that broke something I didn't know could break. You don't feel like a man anymore. And she said it not with anger, but with stillness, like she'd already accepted it, like it wasn't up for debate. That sentence shattered me, not because it was cruel, but because it was true, not objectively, but in her experience of me. What does that even mean? Was I not strong enough, masculine enough? Did I lose my edge, my charm, my authority? No, I hadn't lost those things. I had lost something else, something far deeper. I had lost the energy that a woman can feel, but a man can't always name. Presence, polarity, masculine gravity. That quiet force that says, I'm here, I know who I am, and I don't need you to validate it. That was gone. And the more I tried to fix things, by texting more, buying dinner, being agreeable, the less she responded, because women don't fall for acts. They don't respect gestures, they respect archetypes. It took me years, and another painful breakup, to understand that what she responded to wasn't what I did. It was who I was being. In the language of Carl Jung, there are patterns, ancient psychological energies, that live inside every man. You don't learn them in school. Your father probably didn't teach you. But they shape how women experience you far more than any words you'll ever say. For women over 40, especially those who've matured emotionally, there are only two masculine archetypes they instinctively respect. Not because they're told to, but because their nervous system recognizes them. So here's the question I wish someone had asked me at 45, or even 35. Which archetype are you living from? Because no amount of effort matters if the energy underneath isn't aligned. She doesn't want more of your time. She wants more of your essence. If you've ever felt that quiet rejection, that loss of connection you couldn't explain, you're not broken, you're not too old, you're not unworthy, you're just being called to become more of yourself. Let's begin. I met Lisa when I was 54. I had just finalized my divorce, 31 years of marriage, dissolved not in a courtroom, but in the slow corrosion of distance. I wasn't looking for love again. Hell, I wasn't even looking for myself. She was different, not loud, not flashy. She had this stillness about her, like someone who had learned how to sit with pain without letting it define her. She didn't need me, and maybe that's what drew me in. We went slow. Dinners, walks, talking about everything except the things we didn't want to feel. And for the first few months, it felt like hope. She'd rest her head on my shoulder at the end of a movie. She'd send me texts that said, thinking of you at 2 p.m. She laughed, she touched, she opened. And I did what I knew. I showed up, paid for dinner, asked about her day, made sure she knew I wasn't like her ex. I played the role of the good man, but then something started to shift. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't pull away all at once. It was little things. She stopped reaching for my hand in the car, stopped texting first, started sitting on the far end of the couch, and I chalked it up to stress. Hormones, work, anything but me, until one night after a long dinner where the silence between us was louder than any jazz playing overhead, I asked, "Are we okay?" She looked at me, not cruel, not angry, just tired. And she said, "You're kind. You're good, but I don't feel held." The word confused me. I wasn't hurting her. I wasn't distant. I was here, wasn't I? She shook her head gently, like someone trying to explain a color to a blind man. I don't feel your presence, she said. I feel your effort, but not you. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, trying to decode what she meant. Held. Presence. Not you. I did what most men do when we feel emotionally lost. I doubled down on doing more. Planned a weekend getaway, texted sweet nothings, listened to her stories even when my mind wandered, but nothing landed. Because here's the hard truth I didn't know then. A woman doesn't want you to do more if she can't feel you. She wants to feel the man behind the gesture, the soul behind the routine, and no amount of flowers or dinners can replace that. I kept trying until she stopped answering. There was no big fight, no door slammed, just a quiet fade, like fog lifting slowly from a field, revealing how empty it's always been. Weeks later, I found one of her old scarves in the passenger seat of my truck. I held it, closed my eyes, and asked myself, not about her this time, but about me. Where did I go? Where was my presence? I had learned to show up physically, provide materially, protect logistically, but somewhere along the way I had lost the very thing that made me feel alive. The masculine energy that anchors, contains, stands still without needing to explain itself. And without that, I was just a good man with no gravity, and gravity is what holds things, even love. I didn't find the answers right away, but that night with Lisa, something opened, a doorway, not to winning her back, but to facing a part of myself I'd ignored for decades. That's when Carl Jung's work found me, not as theory, but as mirror. After Lisa left, I didn't jump into another relationship. I sat with myself for the first time in years, and in that stillness, I began to read, to study, to remember. That's when I found Carl Jung. Not in some academic textbook, but in a quote that felt like it had been written for me. You are not just what you do. You are what you carry. Those words led me to a concept Jung called archetypes, deep psychological blueprints that shape how we move through the world. For men, two of the most dominant are the warrior and the king. The warrior is what most of us were trained to be. He fights, he protects, he advances, he serves a mission. He's the man who wakes up at 5 a.m. to work out, the one who provides without complaint, the one who endures, pushes, conquers. There's nobility in him, there's strength. I lived in warrior energy most of my life, and to be honest, it served me. It helped me build a career, support my kids, survive divorce. But here's what Jung and later my own experience taught me. The warrior knows how to fight, but he doesn't always know how to love, because he's always doing, always pushing forward, always preparing for the next battle. So even when he's in the same room with someone, he's not with them. Emotionally, he's still out there on the battlefield. Women may respect the warrior's drive, but eventually they start to feel tired around him. Not because he's weak, but because he never rests. And that means she never gets to rest either. She has to be the one holding the space, carrying the emotions, leading the depth. And over time, that weight becomes too heavy. The king is different. He doesn't chase. He doesn't conquer. He doesn't explain himself to be understood. He radiates. The king is anchored, present. He sets the emotional tone of every room he enters, without needing to raise his voice. He's not here to perform. He's here to be. A man in king energy can look a woman in the eye and say nothing, and she feels more safety than if he gave her 100 reassurances. He is the center of his world, not because he controls everything, but because he knows who he is. And that self-knowing, that grounded, embodied certainty, it's magnetic. The king doesn't need to fix her tears. He doesn't panic when she's overwhelmed. He holds the space, and she softens, not because he told her to, but because she feels him. In our 20s and 30s, warrior energy helps us survive. In our 40s, it builds empires. But after 50, it starts to burn us out. The body slows, the soul gets louder, and life begins to whisper something new. It's time to stop fighting. It's time to start leading. You don't need to be louder. You need to be deeper. You don't need to prove yourself. You need to inhabit yourself. Because here's the truth. Women in their 40s, 50s and beyond, they're no longer impressed by performance. They're drawn to in presence, to emotional gravity, to the man who holds the room, not the one who fills it with noise. That's the king, and maybe no one ever taught you how to be him, but that doesn't mean he isn't already inside you, waiting. The question now isn't whether you have king energy. You do. The real question is, how do you access it? And that journey doesn't begin with effort. It begins with a choice. Let's go there. Here's the part that surprised me most. Accessing king energy doesn't mean you become someone else. You don't need to memorize lines or master techniques or say the right thing at the perfect moment. In fact, the more you try, the further you drift from it, because the king doesn't try, he is. And for a man like me, who spent most of his life trying to earn approval through action, this was a radical shift. I remember the first time I practiced it. I was on the porch with a woman I had been seeing casually. She was upset. Her son had lashed out at her. She was holding back tears, tight, like shame lived in her throat. The old me would have jumped in with advice, tried to fix it, tried to make her feel better so I wouldn't feel helpless. But something in me said, don't fix, don't speak, just be. So I sat. I breathed slowly. I looked at her, not as someone broken, but as someone capable of holding her own storm. If someone else could just hold the space. And I said one thing quietly, you don't have to hold it alone. She exhaled, and then she cried, not dramatically, not for attention, but in a way that felt safe. Because I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't trying to soothe her pain, to escape my own discomfort. I was just there. Still, open, unshaken, and that was enough, because women don't need you to solve their emotions. They need to feel that you won't disappear in the presence of them. That's king energy. And you can't fake it, but you can return to it anytime you choose. It's not about what you say. It's about who you are while saying nothing at all. That's when I realized all the years I spent trying harder were really years I spent avoiding stillness, because stillness reveals who you really are, and that's where the deeper journey begins. Let's go there. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. I used to think fate was why women left me. Wrong timing, wrong person, bad luck. But the truth, fate wasn't doing the driving, my unconscious was, and it had two passengers I had never met. One was called shadow, the other was anima. The shadow is every part of you that you've disowned, the rage you buried, the grief you minimized, the softness you mocked in yourself, the neediness you were told wasn't manly. It's the version of you that never got to speak, but still whispers behind every action. And when you don't face your shadow, you start projecting it onto others. That's when you start saying things like, she's too emotional, she's too intense, she's never satisfied. But maybe she's just mirroring the parts of you that you've never held. And then there's the anima, the feminine within you, not in a sexual way, but in a soul way. It's your ability to feel, to intuit, to connect beyond logic. It's the part of you that can sit in silence and still understand what's being said. But here's the trap. If you don't integrate your anima, if you don't form a relationship with the feminine within, you'll spend your life chasing her outside of you. In women in fantasy, in addiction, you'll keep falling in love not with real women, but with projections. You won't love her. You'll love the image of her that you unconsciously created to fill your own absence. And when she fails to meet that image, you'll feel betrayed, not because she lied, but because she wasn't your inner feminine made flesh. So what's the path forward? It's not about fixing yourself, it's about facing yourself. The warrior protects, the king integrates. The king doesn't fight the shadow, he turns toward it. He doesn't chase the anima, he listens to her voice within. That's the real work of a man after 50, not to become better, but to become whole, to look in the mirror and say, "This is who I am," the grief, the edge, the tenderness, the silence. I no longer need to hide. Because when a man reclaims all that he is, he stops performing love and starts embodying it. That's when a woman feels safe, not because of what you say, but because you finally see yourself, and that presence, that's the moment she says, "There you are." So if this part of you has been asleep, maybe it's time to wake him up, not to become someone else, but to finally return to yourself. So now I'll ask you, man to man, which archetype have you been living from? The warrior, always pushing, always striving, but secretly exhausted from carrying it all alone? Or the king, still grounded, present, not because he's perfect, but because he's whole? I spent most of my life as a warrior, and honestly, I'm still learning to wear the crown without feeling like a fraud. But every time I choose presence over performance, every time I sit with discomfort instead of running from it, I feel the king wake up inside me. And when that happens, the world doesn't just respect you more, you respect yourself more. So I want to hear from you, not just a comment, but a moment. Share in the comments. What was the moment you realized you were no longer living as the king? Was it a conversation, a silence, a goodbye, or maybe you're just now waking him up? And that's okay too. This channel, Smart Advice 50, isn't just about women, dating, or psychology. It's about something deeper, the return of the mature, masculine, the rebirth of the man who leads, not by control, but by clarity, who holds, not with force, but with presence. If you're on that path, even if you've only taken the first step, you belong here. Let's build this together. Sometimes what you thought was heartbreak was just your soul asking for more space. And sometimes, when she walked away, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of you walking back to yourself. Subscribe for more truths like this. And until next time, lead with presence.